Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Whit Ye Daein, where we talk about challenging the status quo. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined today by Jo Chidley. And I cannot really think, Jo, of a better example of someone who challenges the status quo than you. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Now, for our audience, Jo, you and I met, I think probably about 8-9 years ago.
Yep.
You were at the very beginning of your beauty kitchen journey.
Yep.
And I was invited, actually not very far from here in Glasgow, to Sir Willie Hawkey's building.
Yep.
To be a judge in, I think it was called a piranha, actually, a bit like a Dragon's Den type person. And you and Stuart walked in to the room and I just felt the energy, which is always great when you're in that type of mentor opportunity, and I was thrilled to be there in that opportunity. But actually to have watched your journey over those 8 or 9 years, wow, the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up thinking about all I've watched you achieve in those 8 or 9 years. And of course, coming a few weeks ago to your facility and seeing now what you're doing with wow. Talk about challenging the status quo. So we'll come on to Beauty Kitchen, we'll come on to but let's start with Jo, the person. How did a fellow Lanarkshire lassie actually get so enthralled with this global beauty and personal care industry? Where did it start for you, Jo? What was the inspiration?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to beauty or it comes to the personal care industry, it's all about transformation. So I think it really starts when you're a teenager, really. And I was never really that into colour cosmetics. So it was never about makeup. And there's a few reasons for that. I was always a lot smaller. So when I was sort of 16, I looked about 9. Yeah. So it didn't really, that transformation just was not going to happen at that particular stage.
You were going to look like you had your mum's makeup on, basically.
Completely. Just wouldn't work. But what I did really love is, at the time, we were really fortunate. We had a body shop in Motherwell. And, you could go there into that store and become basically someone else. And I was kind of thinking about this when I was driving in here, and I was thinking about influences, and I've got 3 children now, and at first you're influenced by your family, yeah, and then you're influenced by your friends, and then you influence yourself. It's kind of, you don't realise that it is a journey. And I think there's something about when you're being influenced by friends, you still want to influence yourself, but you just can't help, look at what other people are doing. And I think that's just, it's something to do with empathy. There'll be some psychological reason of why we need to do that. But then I wanted to be a journalist, believe it or not. That was always my kind of passion. But I didn't get the grades, and I managed to make it into an Access analytical chemistry course, HND, at Bell College.
Wow.
And that then, Access course, I then went to Strathclyde Uni. So that's what happened. And it was chemistry that was the background. And then skincare and that beauty junkie was, what I wanted to do.
Yes.
So it kind of just moulded together. But then I didn't actually go and become a development chemist as such. I fell into HR and I worked for Avon Cosmetics. So again, there was that, the link there, and some of the big sort of blue chip organisations. And like anyone that wants to start their own business, you always observe and are a bit of a voyeur with other people's businesses, particularly if you work for one, and thinking how you would do things differently. And that's really what it was about. I mean, Avon was a purpose-driven organisation from the start. There's lots of things that Avon don't do well, and we won't go into that, but what they did do well was empowering women.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And for me, that was before we even talked about purpose or impact or any of that.
Ahead of its time, really, Jo.
Completely ahead of its time.
Yeah.
But it was it was culturally throughout the business. I mean, the flexibility that they offered, this is me going back to 2004, so it's like nearly 20 years ago. The job share, everything that they did to support women, not just in the UK, but throughout developing nations as well, is fabulous. Yeah. And I think that gave me a really good grounding.
That's huge, Jo, because, as working mums, I still count myself incredibly blessed to have had the opportunity when my now 26-year-old was born to have that bit of flexibility to still do a role that I loved and I was passionate about. I was at Aspects Beauty, developing European brands across the UK market. And because of the culture that existed from the top in that organisation, I was able to have that flexibility, like you describe, to balance my boys, my passion for the beauty and personal care industry, a bit like yourself. What I didn't know until you shared it there was that Body Shop in Motherwell was where it really started. And my goodness, what a pioneer
they were.
Anita Roddick was.
And Lush still do that. I mean, they have, they are the fun side of beauty. And that's really what's happened is I've always had this avid interest in skincare in particular. Yeah. And, the beauty industry has evolved into a very investment-focused, profit-driven, where people can make a lot of money. And that really then makes it just not fun anymore.
Yes.
It just takes the fun out of it. And that's where, this idea of supporting either young people, minority groups, different genders, everything. The beauty industry is so great at being able to support that. But sometimes the backdrop to how, that is perceived is just quite dirty.
Yes. And I've been talking about this a lot this year, and I don't know if you've been finding the same, but as you know, I'm still very involved in beauty and personal care, more in sort of the tech side of things. But I genuinely am witnessing real change again in the industry. I've been around like you 30 plus years. You talk about your passion for skincare. It's my absolute passion. I went to college to study international spa therapy and management after watching the transformative effect that a few days at a health retreat had in my mum as a 14-year-old. Yep. My tutor, an esthetician tutor, had worked with Helena Rubinstein. And so her passion that she shared, that just, you couldn't help but be infected by that passion. Yeah. And to this day, I'm still fascinated by skin health. And of course, having had the 4 years to work with some of the teams at Croda, to see the innovation that's now happening in ingredients, and how people like yourself are really challenging that status quo to... and I know lots of people consider Beauty Kitchen, and I know you've done incredible things, which you'll hopefully talk about in a moment, around sustainability. But ultimately, what you've created is highly efficacious skincare. Yeah. So tell us a bit about that.
Yes, I mean, that is, again, talking about organisations that you've worked for and how you would do it differently when you set up your own organisation. Well, that kind of is the same when it comes to formulation. So I've tried a lot of different products, a lot of different treatments, and some are great, some are, question mark. But what that does is it then gives you this palette to be able to choose from. And it also makes you seek different things. And, for me, we just have never, for instance, formulated with the use of microplastics. And what I mean by that is materials that have come from the fossil fuel feedstock industry, So, because everyone will say, well, what is a microplastic? Well, there isn't really a true legal definition, and that's why it's so hard to regulate. And that's why plastics in general are so hard to regulate, is because, plastics is not on the periodic table. That people forget. It is, hundreds of different types of, chemicals that are brought together to form different things. So, we laid that down as a initial foundation, and what that does is it does make it more difficult to get the efficacy, because the challenge you then have is that there is lots of products out there that use those types of ingredients to give a certain feel. So a customer expects something to feel a certain way, even though that feel isn't necessarily doing something positive for their skin. So you have to find ways of getting over that. And that's where, we've looked at different ingredients, and a couple of them I'll just mention. So Abyssinian oil, for example, is great in skincare, but it's also great in hair care, because it also replicates some of that feel, that silicones. That's where a lot of ingredients are placed. So Abyssinian oil can be grown almost anywhere. We've had some from the south of England and France, and it is either just as efficacious or more so than jojoba oil or argan oil, but it's more sustainable because it can be grown almost anywhere. And it can also be grown around normal fields. So a normal everyday farmer can grow it as part of their biodiversity. So there's a whole intricate detail around the different ingredients that we look at. It's not just the marketing story. The marketing story is important because you need to get people in and get them to understand the actual efficacy. How does it actually work is really important. But then the knock-on effect of regenerative and biodiversity is key to making sure that those ingredients will still be around in 100 years. And that's really important to us. The other aspect, which is almost the complete opposite to a certain extent, is microalgae. So this is the power of ocean. We don't take our microalgae from the ocean. It's made in a biotank, which is like a large greenhouse. And the power of microalgae is just fascinating. One, most microalgae haven't even been identified yet. So something like 92% of all microalgae that are on the planet haven't even been identified yet. So the forest underneath the sea, if you like, has such great properties. And the great thing about microalgae is you don't need to take it from the ocean. You can identify it. You can understand why that would be good in skincare or in food or in other areas, but you can then just make it in a big greenhouse. So, for me, again it's
a
balance.
real sustainable.
Very much so. Yeah, and the power of the efficacy that the microalgae, the 3 that we use in our current skincare, is just amazing, because they're full of all the omegas, which you need. They're the building blocks to protein, which is your building blocks to collagen, which is what you need for good skincare. So it's, job done. But the other aspect is that when you grow the microalgae, it absorbs CO2 and releases energy, which goes back to the electricity grid. Now, for me, it's like, why wouldn't you?
Yes. Exactly. Why wouldn't you? And as you're speaking, Jo, what I'm really thinking is, gosh, we've still got an incredible amount of work to do on the education of the consumer. Because you're right, we're trying to get the attention of the consumer, and we have to have marketing investment and marketing messaging that does that. But actually, I believe that more than ever, a consumer wants to understand the source and the sustainability of the ingredients, because we now understand much more. I mentioned earlier in my original training, but we know that skin is a living organ that is massively affected by the environment that you live in, by what you put on it, and yet so many consumers just don't understand that yet. So I think we've still got a huge amount of work to do, but it's great to hear the background to those key ingredients within your formulations. One quick question before we move on to Ree. If one of our audience doesn't know Beauty Kitchen, what would be the hero product that you would guide them to meet your brand?
So I think everyone or anyone that uses skincare, is always looking for that perfect moisturiser. That is really it. We are always looking for that perfect day cream. So I would, say our day cream. So you have Abyssinian oil, Hydro Day Boost, and you've got Seahorse Plankton Really Radiant Moisturiser. And that
those would be the two that we okay.
Yes.
And again, for our audience, we would find those because, you know, I've been doing a lot of research through some of the work I've been doing recently on the post-pandemic era of where the customer wants to shop. Because, you know, as an industry, prior to the pandemic, we were still 85% of sales globally were happening in some sort of bricks and mortar. We obviously saw a dramatic digitalisation shift because stores and spas, etc., were closed through the pandemic. But now we're coming into what I keep terming the new era. And the research is telling us that consumers want to meet their beauty brand. They want to touch and feel. And I think that's where a founder like you, with the passion that you've got, and you know, people can find you instantly online talking about product innovation. But where would you recommend people go to find your product and touch and feel?
So again, you have Holland and Barrett would be the sort of mainstay bricks and mortar if you're going there. If you are ever around Wisha in North Lanarkshire, you're more than welcome to come along to Beauty Kitchen there. We have access to our products there as well.
Yes, and I've had the pleasure of doing that, which brings me really, really nicely. Thank you for that link, reminding me of Wishaw. Very important
or
place.
Wishy, if you're local.
Absolutely.
So it is Whit Ye Daein.
It's absolutely Whit Ye Daein in Wishy. I love that.
There you go.
And having been in Wishy a couple of weeks ago and seeing firsthand what you're doing now with Jo, gosh, that is challenging the status quo on a whole other level. Why don't you introduce our audience to and share some of what you shared with me a couple of weeks ago in Wishy?
Well, I'm going to just also say we've now had our confirmed trademark. So there is a new name. Yes, so it's Reposit.
Reposit.
That's what it's going to be called going forward.
And is that hot off the press?
That is hot off the press. Literally, it's just happened and we were kind of waiting on all of that before. So we have just changed a couple of days ago the website address. So it is now Reposit. But if I take a step back, just to talk about the circular economy. So the majority of investment to date in the circular economy has been around recycling. So it's been about making packaging lighter, making packaging cheaper, making packaging more single use, and making it for recycling. And yet we know that recycling, the rates don't work. Yes, so the rates are slightly higher in other materials, but when it comes to single-use plastic, they are still down underneath 10%, which is just outrageous. But we also know that as human beings, we buy stuff, and stuff needs to be in packages. You know, we're not hunter-gatherers anymore. So that is the world that we live in. So something else has to change for us to be able to make it more sustainable. And really what it comes back to is that most packaging, the majority of packaging can be reused. Yes, and particularly within personal care, if we want to centre in on that particular category. So what we've done is we've created Reposit, which is a professionally refillable, reusable packaging system. And what that means is it's packaging as a service. So I know that the audience
Packaging
won't
as a
necessarily
service.
just be Scottish, but everyone will remember a deposit bottle return scheme. And I'm not talking about DRS. I'm talking about the ginger bottle. You know, Iron Brew, you take your bottle back, you get a fresh bottle and you get your whatever it was, 30 pence I think was the amount at the last time.
Well remembered.
So it's a very well, Iron Brew, to be fair, did through Scottish Enterprise, we did go and meet it was the head of communications and also the person that was ultimately responsible for the massive bottle washing facility that they did have. They didn't have it at the time when we went, but they shared a lot of, you know, information to give us reassurance that what we were doing would probably be the right thing. And that was great to have that. You know, a much larger, more established. They had one of the oldest deposit return schemes in the world. I think it was 104 years old when it closed. They had one of the largest bottle washing facilities. And what we've done is we've created a smaller modular version of that. So what happens is we work with large brands and retailers. So we're currently working with Unilever, with some of their personal care and hair care products. So things like Simple, I have forgotten the other one, Persil, so home care, for instance. And we're also working with Marks and Spencer's in all of their home care ranges. So that's everything from, again, laundry liquid, washing up liquid to bathroom cleaner. Beauty kitchen, but we're also in the final stages of projects with some other personal care brands like Neil's Yard,
lovely,
Lush, Weleda, for example, and in discussions with many others. But what basically happens is, if you think of how you buy a shampoo, you would either buy it online or you would buy it in store. You would take it from the shelf, you would take it home, you would use it, and then the packaging would go in the bin. Potentially a recycling bin or a bin. Yeah. What happens with our packaging is the packaging would be returned. So it would either be returned to the point of purchase where you get your other shampoo, or it would be returned at another point, which could be Royal Mail, Collect Plus. So we have thousands of ways. And because of online fashion in particular, or buying from online retailers, returning things is something that people already do.
Yes.
So we're already tapping into consumer behaviour that already happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Jo, I love what you've just described of the research that you did with Bars Iron Brew. Now, for non-Scottish people who don't know Bars Iron Brew, it's a Scottish institution, and I didn't know their bottle recycling was a pioneer. 104
completely.
years it ran for. But a fact that I do know, which is I think is really interesting for our beauty and personal care industry, is there's 2 countries in the world where Coca-Cola is not the number 1 soft drink.
In Scotland as well.
Scotland's one of them. So that's a fun fact if you didn't know that. And it's because of the power of Bars Iron Brew.
Yep.
A brand and an institution that certainly I've always respected. But great to hear that you've taken that knowledge and that learning from someone like that who had literally a century of experience in doing it. And so hopefully, and I'm always hopeful that our industry can get rid of some of the issues that it's got around plastics in particular, but hopefully switching that consumer behaviour into something that their grandparents did is not going to be that difficult.
Well, it's more contemporary. So what we've done is we've used the power of technology. So it's digitally tracked in terms of asset tracking.
Okay.
So it's a basic QR code. It's not that it's anything that complicated, but obviously the software and the hardware that sits behind that system. So we know when a bottle or a piece of packaging was made, when it was manufactured. We know when it was filled. We know when it was sold. We know when it was returned. Yes.
Gosh,
that then gives a lot of information to the brands and retailers.
Yes.
But it also lets the user, be part of that experience as well. And that's really where it's quite exciting because, at the time when, the digital transformation hadn't happened, until fairly recently.
Absolutely. And it's happening as we speak,
as
Jo.
we speak.
There's so many things going through my head when you're describing how the technology is coming into this, what's best practice effectively. Because I think I talked about when we met a few weeks ago, a programme I did with the Side Business School down at the University of Oxford last year, and we were looking at blockchain technology for exactly the reasons that you're describing, so that all the way across the value chain we can see what's inside that bottle, and we can work to get that the formulation and its optimum condition to the consumer. But very, very importantly, as you highlighted, the consumer can see back down that value chain so that he or she can make the choices that are appropriate to them. And that's just a growing part of
for
our
me,
industry.
it fits in with everything that we are doing. So when we talk about purpose and impact, you know, as a small independent business, you know, what we do in terms of...
I love it. I have to stop you there for a second. As a small independent business, you've done more in your less than 10 years than many people do in a lifetime. So let me just... but let you... Please carry on.
Yeah. Well, but it's that independence that gives us that flexibility to do things that some other businesses might not be able to do.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, in terms of the commercials of setting up a packaging as a service for large brands and retailers is something that takes a lot of, you know, internal investment and time. And, you know, for us, if we think of the supply chain and understanding where our ingredients have actually come from, where the product is made, if any, because the challenge that we have with sustainability at the moment is that people get anxious. They get sustainable anxiousness about, are they doing the right thing? And what then can happen potentially is that they then think, well, I'm just going to disengage because I don't know what the right thing is.
Yes.
And you're making me panic, so I'm just going to not think about it anymore. Whereas if we can make it really simple to say that when this bottle was made, it was made with an employer that pays the real living wage, and gives those standards. It was then filled, you know, by somebody based in Bradford. That's one of our contract manufacturers, for example. You know, you can then go, oh, right, okay, I know all of that.
Yes.
And the greenwashing, for me, is dissipated. You know,
Yes.
it supports the certifications and it supports what young entrepreneurial businesses are doing by doing the right thing.
Absolutely.
Through technology.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So let me get the name right. How is Reposit going to shape the future? If we could, you know, I'm sure there's lots of challenges, but I see so many opportunities. Let's hear about some of those challenges and opportunities and how you see Reposit.
So I think with Reposit's next scale up, what will happen is, so in the new year, we're scaling up with Marks and Spencer's. It will be available in many more stores. And when you think about what Reposit is, we're almost the Intel inside. We're not the brand.
Yes,
you know, the brand has...
I like that, yeah.
You know, so, you don't necessarily see Reposit. We're sitting behind, you know, we're the packaging. It's the product that's inside the packaging that you get excited about using. You know, not necessarily the packaging. And what we think is that evolution of Reposit is that it will become, you know, its own entity outside of Beauty Kitchen, because at the moment it sits within Beauty Kitchen. And ultimately, if you think of the trillions of different pieces of packaging that are used, I'm saying trillions, that's just here in Scotland.
Absolutely.
You know, I don't even know how many zeros it is across the globe. But because it can be very modular, what we've created in Wisha, that can actually be lifted and it can be put in the bottle washing facility, the cleaning protocols that we've created to cradle standards. You know, all of this technology that sits behind the infrastructure, it's not just about the bottle, it's around how do you make all of this work? What are the reverse logistics? How do you price in terms of the deposit that needs to be on the packaging? You know, how do you ensure that the cleaning protocols are right depending on the category? Are you then dealing with food and drink? You know, the opportunities and the broadness are huge because everything is in packaging. And we think that, you know, Reposit should be something that is, you know, under some form of different business orientation. Now, what that is, the reason why I'm not mentioning like it's a social enterprise or other, because I actually think that type of globalisation and that type of business model hasn't actually been created yet, where it is democratising sustainability, and that circular economy is something that we own as a community, as a nation, as a region, as a nation, as part of Europe, as part of the globe. You know, I think that for me...
So for our listeners, for our watchers, keen to see something from Reposit. And I must say, when I came to Wishaw a few weeks ago, I thought the bottles looked fantastic. So much so that when I was shopping about 10 days ago, I purposely went to try and find some in M&S, and I couldn't find any.
Yep.
And interesting that it's obviously in limited distribution at the moment.
In the south at the moment.
In the
England.
south, just in the south of England. Okay, so I'll bear that in mind. But I think, that potential to scale that, I think if people can see and understand the opportunity not to be greenwashing, to actually be doing their part with something that looks and feels great and that has that democratised feel, why would they not do it?
Well, the other thing is that we've got 100 years of empirical efficiency and effectiveness that's happened within the single-use industry. And that's the challenge, when you start going back upstream through the supply chain, you've got to then understand that a bottling for a Unilever, for example, is set up in a very specific, efficient, effective way. And you've then got to what we're doing with reuse is we're trying to catch up in a matter of 5 years what has been done in 100 years. And that's why we're using materials that we already know are very durable. So aluminium, stainless steel and glass, they're already, a lot of the times, those materials are already set up for reuse. Yes, and that means that the innovation can then, and the investment can be directed into reuse rather than into single use. And that takes time.
Yes, exactly. So it's a time thing. To finish things off, if there was one thing that you could change to really drive your mission forward, whether it's in Beauty Kitchen or if it's in Reposit, what would it be?
In all Marks and Spencer stores by January.
You didn't say which January, Jo?
January 24.
24. Right. Let's leave that, because I do think it's access to the consumer, like an M&S, which will really help the consumer to understand the opportunity for them to play their part in our, a more sustainable world for us, for our children and for their children.
Yeah, it's systemic change. It
Absolutely.
has to change throughout. It can't just happen in little pockets and little pilots.
Yeah.
And we're all on that journey.
We are. Jo, I can't thank you enough. It's been an absolute pleasure. We'll always keep in touch, because we could sit here and talk all day long, but it's really been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much to our audience again. See you next time on What You Daein.